Good morning, everyone.
Good morning, Rabbi.
We're learning Mishnah Pesachim, Parag Gimel, Chapter 3, Mishnah Hey, Mishnah 5. Okay. So now, the Mishnah begins with a word which has to be read, which is spelled similar to a different word that we've had before, but this word has to be read as Seur. Seur means that Seur means a dough began to rise. Okay, it started to rise. It started to become chametz, and then the chametz process was impeded. It was stopped. That's Seur. And now Seur, when this happens, the Mishnah says, Yisaref, you have to burn it. V'ha'oich le'pater. If you eat it, though, you are exempt. That means that if you eat it, there's no punishment that comes. We know if you eat what's called chametz gomer, absolute chametz, and you eat it intentionally, there's a punishment of karis, premature death, or spiritual excision. Other types of chametz we learned, you only get lashes for. If the Mishnah says if you ate Seur that you're exempt, then that really means that there is no Torah prohibition on it. But rather there is a rabbinic prohibition, which therefore says you have to burn it, but if you eat it, you're exempt. Okay, that's what Seur is. Seur is dough that started to rise. It did not finish. At the end, you have to burn it, but if you were to eat it, you would not receive any kind of punishment. According to Torah law, this is not considered chametz that you're liable for, but since midrabanan, the rabbi said you may not eat it, therefore it has to be burnt. Now, two things. So this kind of chametz that we're calling Seur, you remember there's another word called Sa'ar? The Torah says, Sa'ar lo yimatzei bevatechem. Sa'ar is translated as sourdough. So we really have two things here. They're spelled the same way, the same letters, but they're pronounced differently. They're read differently. There's Sa'ar, which is sourdough, which is what you throw into a dough to get it to start rising quicker, which means to get it to start becoming chametz quicker. And sourdough is absolute chametz itself. If you eat sourdough, you would be you'd be liable for it. You'd be punished for it. But this is Seur. Seur, as I said, means the dough began to rise, it began to become chametz, and it stopped.
By itself?
For whatever reason, just stopped. It didn't continue. And because of that, it's not really chametz. And therefore, minatayra, according to Torah law, you should be able to eat it. But the rabbi said you may not eat it. Rabbinic prohibition. Because of that, you have to burn it. And at the end of the day, if you eat it, you'd be exempt. Now, what's interesting to note is, you remember we spoke about something called chametz nuksha? That meant chametz that's inedible, which means it became chametz, but the way it's processed, it's pretty much inedible. We had a Mishnah, the first Mishnah in this parak actually said that when we talk about chametz nuksha, it's prohibited. There's no karis for it, but it's prohibited, which means if you eat it, you'd get lashes. This case of a dough that began to rise and stopped, became a chametz and stopped, really is equivalent to chametz nuksha. It's chametz, right? It's the equivalent of that. I mean, the processing and what comes from it is different. Chametz nuksha means it became chametz, but it was never really edible. Here we're talking about chametz that begins to become chametz and doesn't finish. Do we say about that? Yeah, it doesn't say that it's not edible, but from the point of the laws of chametz, it's the equivalent of chametz nuksha. They both should be the same. Our Mishnah says that if you eat the Seur, you're exempt, which means, according to this Mishnah, chametz nuksha, you'd also be exempt, which means that this Mishnah and the first Mishnah we learned are arguing with each other regarding that. The first Mishnah said that for chametz nuksha, it would be prohibited from the Torah to eat. And this case of Seur, which the Mishnah says you'd be exempt, which is halachically the equivalent regarding chametz to chametz nuksha, it says here you're exempt, and therefore there's clearly an argument from that point between these two Mishnayos. The first Mishnah would say that the chametz nuksha or this seir would be prohibited from the Torah, while this Mishnah is saying no, it's only prohibited midrabanan according to rabbinic law. At the end of the day, it still has to be burnt. So that's seir. Seir again is the dough that began to become chametz and then it stopped. Siduk. Siduk is another process, another chemical process in the dough, which translates as cracked. Siduk means if it cracks, yisaref, you got to burn it. V'oichlai chayiv karis. But whoever eats it is actually chayiv karis. If it comes to the point of what we call siduk, that it cracks, then it's actual chametz. It's chametz gomer. It's absolute chametz. If you eat a kazayis of it, you're going to be, and you did it intentionally, you'd be punished by karis, by this spiritual excision, by premature death, as we kind of loosely call it. Now, we have the names of these processes, of these statuses. Now we got to figure out ezehu seir. What is seir? How can you recognize seir on a dough? What happens there? The answer is kachane gachavim. There are cracks that appear, but they appear like the karne chagavim, which really means the horns of grasshoppers. Grasshoppers don't have horns, right? They have antennae. They have antennae, right? So the point is that if these cracks are like the antennas of grasshoppers, then you know it's only seir. Now, the point of these cracks being described this way means that these are not cracks that cross each other. They're very short, and therefore they kind of go, each one goes in its own direction, but they never meet each other. When that is what happens to the dough, you know that it's come to the point, it's seir. It's not chametz. It's not regular chametz. It's seir. And therefore, you're going to have to burn it, but if you eat it, you wouldn't be liable. Siduk, cracked, means shenis arvu sedakav zebazeh. The cracks mix with each other. The cracks become big enough that they actually cross over each other. If that's what happens, then you know that it's chametz, real chametz. Di Rabbi Yehuda, these are the words of Rabbi Yehuda. The Chachamim say, in each case, whether the cracks cross over each other, whether the cracks don't cross over each other, they just kind of go in their own little direction, you're chayiv kares by both, according to Chachamim. Any cracks is already a sign of chametz. Veizeyu seir. So what is seir? This process where the chametz stopped, that we say in this Mishnah that you're not liable for eating it. Kol shechsifu panav ka'adam shamdu saraisav. When the surface has turned pale, like the face of a person whose hair stands on end because of fright. That's how it's being described. Okay, if you get scared enough that your hair is standing on end from fright, your skin color will not be regular. It will be quite pale. So if the color of the surface of this dough is basically very pale, we would call it white. Can't tell you exactly how white, but it's pale like the face of a person who is very frightened, and therefore he's become pale. If the color of the dough has become pale, then you know it's seir. There's no cracks. Once there's cracks, it's chametz, according to the Chachamim. But if you see this dough and the color of the dough, the surface has turned pale, then you know it's seir. The process has begun, but it stopped. And that's when we say that you have to burn it. However, you would not be liable for eating it. Have a wonderful day and a wonderful Shabbos.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Too dry, too wet.